Good morning, students. Yesterday we discussed about the techniques of developing measurement tools. Okay, so these techniques of developing measurement tools involves four steps, four stage processes or four stage steps. The first one is concept development, and second one is specification of the concept dimensions, and third step is selection of the indicators, and the fourth one is formation of index. Okay, we discussed these four steps in detail in the previous class to develop the measurement scale. And also we discussed about the meaning of scaling and the definition of scaling, and also we discussed about the classification of scale, how the scales are being classified, on what basis. Okay, that also we discussed. So in connection with the classification of scales, we discussed about the subject oriented classification, response form classification, degree subjectivity classification, and scale properties, and number of dimensions, and scale construction techniques. Okay, so these things we discussed in the previous class. Okay, friends, today we'll discuss about the important scaling techniques. Important scaling techniques. So the important scaling technique often used in context of research, especially in context to social and business research. Here we come across the rating scales. Here we come across the rating scales and the rating scales, and also the scale construction techniques. So that we'll discuss in the next one. Okay, we'll discuss what are the various types of these rating scales. Okay, the rating scales involves a qualitative description. Okay, it is the qualitative description of the limited number of aspects of the things. Okay, the limited number. Okay, here the quantity restriction is there, the number of object restriction is there. Okay, thing and of traits of a person. Okay, I repeat, the rating scale involves qualitative description. Involves qualitative, not quantitative description. It is a qualitative description of the limited number of aspects of the things or the traits of a person. Okay, when we use rating scales, okay, we also call it as a categorical scales. We judge an object, okay, in an absolute terms against some specified criteria. Okay, here what we do, we judge the object in absolute terms against some specified criteria. We judge the properties of objects without reference to the other similar objects. That's what it means. Okay, the rating may be such a form that like, dislike, above average, average, and below average. And other classification with more categories such as like very much, like somewhat, neutral, dislike, somewhat dislike, dislike very much, excellent, good, average, below average, poor, always, often, occasionally, rarely, never, and so on. So these are all called as qualitative assessments. Okay, these are all called as qualitative assessment with respect to an object. Okay, about the traits of a certain persons, etc. There is no specific rule whether to use 2-point scale, 3-point scale, or scale with still more points. Okay, 2-point scale, for example, like, dislike, it's called as a 2-point scale. Okay, the above average, average, below average is a 3-point scale. Okay, like very much, like somewhat, neutral, dislike, somewhat, dislike very much. This is called as a 5-point scale. So like this, these scales are being designed. Those scales are called as rating scales, or they are called as categorical scales. Okay. Then this rating scales may be either graphic rating scale or itemized rating scale. Guys, please note down, the rating scales are being classified as graphic rating scales or itemized rating scale. You should know the difference between these two things. Understand? The first one we'll discuss, the graphic rating scale is a quite simple and commonly used in practice. Under it, various points are usually put along the line to form a continuum, and the rater indicates his rating by simply making a mark. Okay, mark is nothing but a tick mark at the appropriate point on the line that runs from one extreme to the other extreme. Okay, I will give an example for that. Okay, the scale points with a brief description may be indicated along the line. Okay, the scale points have to be described on the line, their function being to assist the rater in performing his job. Okay, for example, you consider a 5-point graphic rating scale when we wish to ascertain people's liking or disliking any product. It is an example. Okay, whether people like or dislike a product. Okay, then how to be the respondents' data is to be collected on a 5-point graphic scale. For example, you look at the figure 5.1 of the Kothari research methodology book. Okay, there is a line. Okay, there is a line. So the left side, one extreme is called as like very much, and the right extreme is called as dislike very much. Okay, dislike very much with respect to the product. Okay, the first point is left side, like very much. The second point is like somewhat. Third point is neutral. Fourth point is dislike somewhat. And fifth point, there is a last extreme at right side, will be dislike very much. So this is the 5-point scale. Okay, and for each point we need to describe the each point what it represents. Then we need to ask the customer to represent or put a tick on the point scale. Okay, how do you like the project? Whether do you like the product very much or do you like the product somewhat, or do you dislike somewhat the product, or do you dislike very much the products? So like this, the customer or the user of the product is being asked to note down. The type of scale, okay, this scale has got certain limitations. The respondents may check at almost any portion along the line, which fact may increase the difficulty of analysis. The meaning in terms of like, very much, somewhat may depend upon the respondent's frame of reference, so much so that the stated might be challenged in terms of its equivalence. Okay, this is what the limitation of this scale. Understand? The second one is itemized rating scale. Second one is itemized rating scale, where it's also called as a numerical scale. It's also called as a numerical scale. It presents a series of statements from which the respondent selects one as a best reflecting his evaluation. Okay, this scale, they are to be written in the form of sentences. Okay, here the respondent is asked to tick any one of his opinion or his liking for the evaluation. These statements are ordered progressively in terms of more or less of some property. Okay, the sentence are to be written in such a way that it should be in the decreasing order of importance or increasing order of importance, like that. Okay, it should be systematically, chronologically, the sentence have to be written. Okay, for example, consider the example, how well the worker does get along with his fellow workers. Okay, it is an example. How does a worker get along with his fellow worker? Okay, how the questions have to be framed. He is almost always involved in some friction with fellow worker. This is the first sentence. Second, he is often at odds with one or more of his fellow workers. Third, he sometimes gets involved in friction. Fourth, he frequently becomes involved in a friction with the others. The fifth point, he almost never gets involved in friction with fellow workers. So, like this, the sentences have to be written. Sentence have to be written, called as itemized rating scales. Okay, the respondent is being asked to tick any one of these 5 ratings. Okay, so this is called as itemized rating scale. The chief merit of this scale is that it provides more information and measuring to the rater, and thereby increases the reliability. Okay, it increases the reliability of the process of the measurement, and this form is relatively difficult to develop, and the statements may not say exactly what respondents would like to express. So this was one of the limitation. Okay, the rating scales have certain good points and certain bad points. Okay, based on our research study, we need to identify one of the scale, and we need to refer that we have referred this scaling for our research. And we need to justify why we have selected this kind of scaling technique also. Understand? Then ranking scales. Okay, those are called as the rating scales and ranking scales. Okay, you must remember that there are 2 types of scales. One is known as a ranking scale, one is known as rating scales, what we discussed now, and the other one is known as the ranking scales. Okay, so under this ranking scales or the comparative scales, it's called as comparative scale, where the previous one, the rating scale, are called as categorical scales. These ranking scales are called as comparative scales, and we make relative judgment against with other similar objects. The respondents under this study directly compare 2 or more objects, okay, and make choices amongst them. So there are 2 general used approaches of this ranking scale. Here the comparison is going to be made between 2 objects, whereas in the previous rating scale we used only one object. Of reference. Here 2 objects are going to be referred and they are being compared. Okay, so the types of ranking scales, the one is known as method of paired comparison, and there is another type of ranking scale is method of rank order scaling. Okay, there also we have 2 categories, and in this ranking scales also we have 2 categories. We will discuss now the first one, the method of paired comparison. Well, what it means? Under it, the respondent can express his attitude by making choice between 2 objects. Say, between a new flavor of soft drink, it is an example, new flavor of soft drink, and the established brand of the drink. Okay, there are 2 objects of references, and we need to compare and we need to mark. But when there are more than 2 stimuli to judge, the number of judgments required in a paired comparison. Okay, so for this we need to use a formula. Please note down the students, the formula used is capital N is equal to small n into bracket n minus 1 bracket complete whole divided by 2. So this is the formula being used for the number of judgments required for paired comparison when the stimuli exceeds the more than 2. Okay, so capital N is the number of judgments and small n is the number of stimuli or the object to be judged. Understand? So this is called as method of paired comparison. So remember that the paired comparison provides an ordinal data. Okay, it is provides an ordinal data. You know the meaning of the ordinal data we discussed in the previous class. But the same may be converted into interval scale. This ordinal data can be converted into interval scale by the method of law of comparative judgment. The law of comparative judgment. What do you mean by this? Okay, the law of comparative judgment, this was being developed by L.L. Thurston. L.L. Thurston. He converted ordinal data into interval scale, that is known as law of comparative judgment. This technique involves the conversion of frequencies of preferences into the table proportions, which are then transferred into Judd matrix by referring to the table of the area under the normal curve. Area under the normal curve. Okay. So for this you refer the book, Kothari book. He has given explained in detail. And J.F. Guilford in his book Psychometric Methods has been given a procedure which relatively easier compared to this, and this method is known as composite standard method and can be illustrated with the examples in the book. Understand? So here what they do is comparing the total number of preferences for each or of the 4 proposals will be done and will be tabulated. Okay, so that you refer the book for that example. Okay, it is not necessary, just if you want to understand you can refer. Okay, just you know the definition, what it means by the method of paired comparison and which formulas are being used, what you mean by the law of comparative judgment, that is enough. Understand? Okay, then second one, method of rank order. So under this method of comparative scaling, the respondents are asked to rank their choices. Here, the respondents are asked to rank their choices. This method is easier and faster than the method of paired comparison stated above. Okay, this method is easier, simpler and faster than the previous method of paired comparison. For example, with 10 items it takes 45 paired comparison to complete the task, whereas the method of rank order simply requires ranking of 10 items only. Ranking of 10 items only. The problem of transitivity is also not there in case of we adopt the method of rank order. Okay, moreover, the complete ranking at times is not needed, in which case of the respondents may be asked to rank only their first. Okay, say 4 choices while the number of overall items involved may be more than 4. Say it may be 15 or 20 or more. Okay, to secure a simpler ranking of all items involved, we simply total rank values received by each item. There is a method through which we can as well develop an interval scale of these data, but then there are limitations of this method. The first one is that the data obtained through this method are ordinal data, and hence rank ordering is an ordinal scale with all its limitations. Then there may be a problem of respondents becoming careless in assigning the ranks, particularly when there are many items, that is more than 10 items. Okay, this is all the description about the rank order method of ranking. Okay, so now we'll discuss about the scale construction techniques. Okay, the scale construction techniques in social science studies. While measuring the attitudes of the people, we generally follow a techniques of preparing the questionnaires, or we call it as an attitude scale, in such a way that the scores of the individual responses assigns him a place on the scale. Okay, under this approach, the respondent expresses his agreement or disagreement with the number of statements relevant to the issue. So, while developing such statements, the researchers must note the following two important points to be considered: that the statements must elicit the responses which are psychologically related to the attitude being measured. The second one, that the statement need be such that they discriminate not merely between the extremes of the attitude but also among the individual who differ slightly. So these are the 2 points to be considered in designing the or in construction of the scales. Understand? So with all this in mind, the psychologists and sociologists have developed several scales construction techniques for this purpose. Okay, the researcher should know these techniques so as to develop an appropriate scale for his own study. Some of the important approaches along with the corresponding scale to develop under each approach to measure the attitudes of the people, of the object, or the person is as follows. Okay, so here the many psychologists or the sociologists have developed several scales to construct these scales. Okay, so the first one is arbitrary scales. Arbitrary scales are developed on ad hoc basis and are not designed largely through the researcher's own subjective selection of items. Okay, the researcher first collect the few statements or items which he believes are unambiguous and appropriate to a given topic. Some of these are selected for inclusion in measuring the instrument, and then the people are asked to check in the list in the statements with which they agree. Okay, that is called as arbitrary scales. They are called as the ad hoc scales. Okay, they are being designed largely to the researcher with its own subjective selection of items. The second one is known as differential scales, or it is called as Thurstone type of scales. Okay, the name of L.L. Thurstone is associated with differential scales which have been developing using consensus scale approach. You know what is consensus? Okay, we need to pass the items or the attributes to the in a group. Okay, and we need to ask the responses of the judges, and then we need to decide the scale. That is called the consensus scale approach. Okay, this is being differential scale uses the consensus scale approach. Under such approach, the selection of the item is made by a panel of judges who evaluate the item in terms of whether they are too relevant to the topic area or unambiguous in implication. Okay, that are to be considered. Understand? So these are all called as the differential scaling. There are certain procedures and involved. The researchers gathers the large number of statements, okay, usually 20 and more, and these statements are then submitted to the panel of judges, okay, to have their opinion about the scaling construction, and this scoring by each judge yields the composite portion of the each items. Understand? So this is some of the procedure being adopted in construction of the differential scale. Okay, then summated scale, or it's called as a Likert type of scale. Okay, the summated scale or Likert type of scale. So here the summated scale or Likert type of scales are developed by utilizing the item analysis approach, where particular item is evaluated on the basis of how well it discriminates between those persons whose total score is high and those score whose is low. Okay, that is called as the summated scale, or it is called the Likert-Hart scale. I will give an example later. Okay, the summated scale consists of number of statements which express either favorable or unfavorable attitude towards a given object to the respondent is asked to react. Okay, the most frequently used summated scale in the study of social attitudes follow the pattern devised by the Likert. Okay, for these reasons they are often referred as Likert type of scales. Understand? Likert, and the respondent is asked to respond each of the statement in terms of several degrees, usually 5 degrees. Okay, but at 3 or 7 may also be used of the agreement or disagreement. Okay, for this Likert-Hart scale, it's also called as summated scale. Okay, here we need to use the points, that is called as either it may be the 2-point scale or 3-point scale or 5-point scale. Okay, but the 3 or 7 may also be used. Okay, any points can be used on the scales. I will give an example, okay, of the agreement or disagreement. For example, when we are asked to express opinion whether one considers his job quite pleasant, the respondent may be asked to respond in any one of the following ways. Okay, so we have a Likert scale, that is nothing but as one line. Okay, so at the left extreme we have marked as strongly agree, and the right extreme we marked as strongly disagree. Okay, that is the 5th point. So the first point is strongly agree, the 5th point is strongly disagree. So in between, the second point is agree, the third point is undecided, and fourth point is disagree. So the finally it is called as a 5-point Likert-Hart scale. Here the respondent is asked to judge his opinion about the object in consideration. Okay, so that is called as Likert-Hart scale. Likert-Hart scale. So we can find there are 5 points that constitute a scale. One extreme, that's already explained, is the agreement and given statement. The other, the strong disagreement, and between them the intermediate points have to be set. Okay, as I explained now, that is called the Likert-Hart scale. So then we need to discuss about the cumulative scales. Cumulative scales. Cumulative scales they are called as Lewis-Gutmann's kilogram analysis. Okay, like other scales, consists of series of statements to which the respondent expresses his agreement or disagreement. The special feature of this type of scale is the statement is in it form a cumulative series. Here the statement has got cumulative sum up, so that I will give an example so that you will better understand. I repeat once again, the cumulative scales, this is also called as Lewis-Gutmann's scalegram analysis. Okay, like other scales, it consists of series of statements to which the respondent expresses agreement or disagreement. Okay, the special feature of this type of scale is that the statement in it form a cumulative series. So this other words means that the statements are related to one another in such a way that an individual who replies favorably to say the item number 3 also replies favorable to the item 2 and 1. Say for example, we have written the statements 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 statements. Okay, so they are the attributes or they are the qualities which are going to be assessed. Okay, and these statements have to be formed in such a way that, designed in such a way that the third point covers, if the respondent puts third point, if selects third point, that is nothing but he is also considering the importance for the first point as well as the second point. Okay, the third point is designed in such a way that it can take care of first point as well as second point. Okay, if the respondent marks fifth sentence of the measurement of the cumulative sentences of the scale, if he marks fifth sentence, that includes, that says that he is also agreeing for the first statement, second statement, third statement, fourth statement. Okay, if he marks fifth, okay, it takes care of all above 4 sentences. He agrees for all the 4 above sentences. It is called as cumulative scales. Okay, students, you understood better, it seems now, by giving an example. Okay, then the next we consider the factor scale. Okay, the factor scale are developed through factor analysis. Okay, or on the basis of intercorrelation of the item. So we indicate that common factor accounts for the relationship between the item. We need to identify a common factor. We need to establish the correlation between the two items or the two object of consideration. That is called as factor scale. Factor scales are particularly useful in uncovering the latent attitude dimensions and approach of scaling through the concept of multi-dimensional attribute space. Okay, more specifically, there are two problems: how to appropriately with the inverse of content of multi-dimensional, and how to uncover underlying dimensions which is not been identified. Okay, so here we have been going to classify as semantic differential scale and multi-dimensional scaling. Then what do you mean by semantical differential scaling? That is called as SD scaling. Okay, the semantic differential scale or SD scale is developed by Charles E. Osgood and C. and Tenenbaum, okay, in 1957. An attempt to measure the psychological meaning of an object to an individual. The scale is based on the presumption that an object can have different dimensions of connotative meaning, which can be located in multi-dimensional property space, what can be called as schematic scales in the context of SD scale. Okay, you can refer the figure 5.4, okay, given in the Kothari book. Okay, I'll give an example. Candidate for leadership position. Okay, so along with the concept, the ideal candidate, or the ideal candidate may be compared, and we may score them with +2, -3. You refer that sketch, you'll come to know. +3 to -4 on the basis of above stated scales. Okay, there is a letters EPA showing the relevant factors and evaluation, potency and activity respectively, written along the left side, okay, are not written in the actual scale. Similarly, the numeric values are shown are on not written on the actual scale. Okay, you refer the figure 5.4. Okay, the space that is called as the schematic space, the SD space is divided into 6 by 9 spaces. Okay, so the left side, you see the successful, severe, heavy, hot, progressive, strong, active, fast, true, and scalable. Okay, and the right side we marked as unsuccessful, aberrant, light, cold, regressive, weak. So like this, the properties with respect to a leadership of a person is going to be marked in this space, and the respondent is being asked to put his tick marks in the several points of the space. That is called as schematic differential scale. Okay, the last one is called as multi-dimensional scaling. Multi-dimensional scaling is also called as MDS scaling. Multi-dimensional scaling is also called as MDS scaling. So it is relatively more complicated scaling device, but with this sort of scaling one can scale objects. One can scale objects individually, individuals or both with the minimum information. So the multiple dimension scaling, that is MDS scaling, can be characterized as set of procedures for portraying a perpetual and effective dimension of the subjective interest. Okay, so it provides a useful methodology for portraying subjective judgment of diverse kinds. MDS, okay, that is multidimensional scaling, is used when all the variables, okay, in the study are to be analyzed simultaneously, and all such variables happen to be the independent. Okay, the underlying assumption in MDS is that people or the respondents perceive a set of objects as being more or less similar to one another on the number of dimensions, okay, instead of only one. So hence this is called as multi-dimensional scaling technique, okay, or it is called as MDS scaling technique. Okay, it takes care of all dimensions of the object of consideration. Okay, with this we complete the chapter of measurement and scaling. Okay, the students, hope you understood the all types of scaling techniques. Understand, you note on the question, note on the question. Identify the important scaling techniques and explain with neat sketch and example for each. What is scale construction technique? As a researcher, what are the points to be considered in construction of the scales? And discuss the important approaches which are used to develop a scales in the construction of scale techniques. And explain with example and sketches. Okay, well guys, you clearly listen this video 2 times, 3 times till you understand the concepts of the scaling and measurement, and note the points, prepare the notes, and you need to submit when you come to the college. Okay, and also answer the questions which have been given. You need to submit. So this is what the work which I am giving to you. Don't take it lightly, be very serious and prepare the notes and answer the questions given in at the end of the video. Okay, bye, take care, have a good day.